here now. Say when you're down and you're confused, don't remember who you're talking to, but you got to Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this afternoon's summit. If you would please take your seats, we'd like to begin the program in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
Here I am, still
song that's become a new New Orleans standard, like, in a way. Everybody seems to be playing it. It's a song called Blues for Ben.
I'm taking 4 strings of your hair and a $5 bill. Gonna put 'em in a letter and drop in the mail. Gonna send 'em to a woman a friend of mine told me about. She's a gumbo cooker and an alligator hooker, make a dead man jump and shout. Talking about a woman named Hannah. Where she live? Down in Louisiana. What she do? Tell me she's a mojo worker. She's gonna work a thing for me now. She's gonna end my misery. I know you'll be back home real soon. Work it up, Hannah. Said real soon now, yeah. She don't wear fancy stitches. All she wears is man britches. Every now and then she take a little sip. Oh Lord, she's got
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Our program will begin shortly. Please begin taking your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin.
Ten years ago, the U.S. Gulf Coast was ravaged by Hurricane Katrina, the deadliest and most destructive hurricane of the 2005 Atlantic hurricane season. 10 years ago, communities were devastated, lives were lost, and some changed forever. People had to fight hard in order to ensure their survival. But that's not how this story ends. 10 years ago, there was life and a fighting spirit in the midst of all the chaos. People cared about each other. Neighbors helped neighbors, and heroes stepped forward. It wasn't easy, but we stood together because we had to. We wanted to be there for each other, to get through the hard times. We, Walmart, our associates, volunteers, and partners have all learned so much during Hurricane Katrina. And we're glad to have had the opportunity to be here for the Gulf Coast at that time. 10 years since Katrina, and we've applied disaster relief, resiliency, and best practices around the world to help communities live better.
Please welcome Mayor Mitch Landrieu, the City of New Orleans.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Doug, I don't know what to say about Walmart. You guys were with us in our darkest hour. I mean, you guys, when this thing happened, were here right away. And one of the reasons is because your employees were in it just like we were. And so I want to welcome you, and I want to thank you guys for hosting this event today, and also for hosting a day of service, which is really at the end of the day what it's about, right? Ken Sensor, the Vice President, welcome. My buddy, Harry, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being such a great ambassador for the city of New Orleans. You might not know this, but you're the most famous New Orleanian. Did you know that? No. I'm just a little pup. And Governor Barber, our great partner and our friend from Mississippi, one of the great governors that the country's ever had. At a time, demonstrated tremendous leadership, and I thank you, and I'm happy to see you, and thank you for being here. Dan, thank you for coming as well. And Tony Robinson, who represents President Obama, Regional Director for FEMA, I appreciate your presence as well. And to all of you that are here with us, I look around the room and I see so many of our first responders who was with us, state troopers who were just champions at the time. You know how much I love you guys and how special you are. And to all the folks that work in emergency preparedness, I just can't tell you how much we appreciate what it is that you did for us. And so as we come to the 10th anniversary, we want to first remember all the lives that were lost. Can't ever forget that. We lost 1,800 plus American citizens across the entire Gulf Coast. We had 1 million homes that were hurt, 250,000 destroyed. It's really hard even for us to contemplate the breadth and the depth of the damage that were done. In most of the catastrophes that we have, as bad as they all are, most of them are geographically isolated. Not everybody gets hurt. Everybody else can kind of come help them. Here, everybody lost everything, wiped out. When Rita hit Lake Charles and Cameron Parish, there was literally not one building standing. And the Gulf Coast has had its share of catastrophe from Betsy to Camille and then on and on. you know, we kind of thought this was just going to be a wind event, but the levees broke and it became a water event. And then, you know, like all hell broke loose. And the rules of engagement changed. And so, Colonel Edmondson, you were there with your team. And I just want to tell you that the response from the private citizens in the corporate sector really was just an incredible thing. And the truth of the matter is that from Walmart's perspective, you guys got at it right away. And let me tell you that the faster that the private sector got stood back up, you got your stores opened up so people can get what they needed in terms of food, in terms of shelter. It made it a little bit easier for FEMA to get those MREs down to the ground. Now, I can remember one fight that we had with FEMA, and we've had many, and it's much, much better today, Tony, than it was then. But after about the 4th or 5th day of trying to figure out whether we could get MREs to the ground, somebody from FEMA kind of accused the folks in Louisiana of trying to suck down more MREs than maybe we needed or were entitled to. And I told this young man, I said, look, I don't know you that well, but let me make something real clear to you. No self-respect in Louisiana would ever choose to eat an MRE when they can eat etouffee. So get that out of your mind. That's not going to happen. And as we started rebuilding, you know, I think we kind of got our legs underneath us and we got back on our way. But the first thing we want to do is to remember everybody that was lost. Secondly, we want to make sure, and I know Governor Barber joins me in this, is thanking all of the people that came to our aid. This is something that should bring you to your knees. If you have any iota of empathy in your body and joy about people helping people, you know the rest of the world gasped at the possibility that a piece of America could just go away. And when they saw the pictures of that storm coming, Governor, and they saw the aftermath, and they saw the folks along the Gulf Coast, everything being gone, and then they saw the pictures of the Superdome, and they saw the pictures of the Convention Center, and they figured out that people were stuck in St. Bernard, and they knew this storm did not know race. It did not know creed, it did not know color, and you know what? It didn't know geography. It wiped everybody clean. They really thought for a minute that, oh my God, we have actually lost a piece of America, and they gasped and said, what can I do to help? And then people rushed to our aid. Canadian Mounties got down here like in lickety-split. All right, we had folks from Israel that flew in that helped us, people from Australia, people from Qatar, people from the UAE. I'm going to tell you a story I heard the other day. I had a beautiful occasion to visit the Vatican at the Pope's request with a bunch of other mayors. And as I was standing there, a nun walked up to me who I had never met before and said, I want to tell you a story about some women in Liberia. And I said, really? She said, yeah, they work in a rock quarry. They make $1 a day. They heard about Katrina and the loss, and do you know they went to work and they worked extra hard, and together they raised $100 and sent it to the city of New Orleans to help the people of New Orleans. There are people who had nothing, gave everything so that the people on the Gulf Coast could live again. And that is emblematic of the great American spirit. And I like to believe that subsequent to Katrina and Rita, the people of the Gulf Coast have shown Americans a true American spirit of when you're down and when you're out, that you're going to stand back up again and come hell or high water. And we have had both, right? Katrina, Rita, Ike, Gustav, the national recession, the BP oil spill. If you're a man of faith, you got to ask, when are the locusts coming? And the people on the Gulf Coast really demonstrated to the rest of America what it takes to stand back up. But of course, we could have never done it without people helping people, and of course, all of our philanthropic partners. And we have not had a better partner than Walmart, who not only came in to help us rescue people, and not only came in to get their stores back up and operating, but when people were kind of guessing, are they really going to come back? Are they really going to make it? Are we really going to take that financial risk? Companies like Walmart said, not only are we going back, we're going to double down. You guys have opened 2 stores in this city in the last 2 years, creating 600 jobs, giving people in New Orleans the ability to stand themselves back up. And that is really just an unbelievable act of courage, and it is an act of confidence in us. And then finally, what you guys have been so great at helping us work through is the idea of resilience. Now, everybody knows that from an emergency preparedness point of view, the country's way better off than we were 10 years ago. We really kind of want thinking through it really clearly, although after September 11th, if we read the report, we would have known that where there's no clear command and control, where there's no clear coordination between and amongst all the government agencies in the private sector, where there's no interoperability, the ability to talk to each other when you can't see, you can't figure out where people are. So how are you going to get there? And just the downline logistics of getting the bus to where the people are tends to be complicated. Congressman Hamilton and Governor Keene actually wrote that in their report after September 11th. So 4 years later, when Katrina and Rita hit, guess what? We had not learned that lesson yet. But I think the country knows it a lot better today than it did 10 years ago. An emergency operation response, and I know that Mike Edmondson can tell you this, Mark Cooper certainly can, who is one of the great stars at Walmart, that the country is better at it because now we know terrorist attack, earthquake, hurricane, something big and bad is coming our way. And not only can you not stop it, you just got to get ready for it. But here's the thing, no storm, no terrorist attack, no earthquake is the same. And just as you're sitting there waiting about the last storm or the last thing, and you think that gorilla is just going to be 25 feet high, guess what? It's 60 or 70 feet high, and it's bigger and it's better. And now, in our country, because of what we learned from the mishaps that we had in Katrina, we are much better able to respond from an emergency preparedness point of view. The second thing that happened as a result of our work with you guys is we started thinking about resilience in a different way. And not only building barriers, like I call it the Great Wall of New Orleans. It's 1.2 miles long, it's 200 feet in the water, it's 26 feet deep. We're talking about coastal restoration, we're talking about building codes, we're talking about building back stronger. The idea of resilience is much deeper and much better because what we're doing is making sure that everybody in the neighborhoods is strong. And as we build back, resilience gets to be the theme of the day. And Walmart has helped lead that effort. And on top of that, has helped lead the effort about making sure that we continue to volunteer, continue to work, continue to make sure that the community shows up. So on behalf of the people of the city of New Orleans, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you, to thanks Governor Barber. It is great to be with you again. And Harry, thank you for being such a great ambassador for our wonderful city. God bless you all, and thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Doug McMillon, President and CEO, Walmart Stores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We really appreciate you being here and your words. I want to thank everybody for being here. What a great turnout. We're honored to have all of you here. It's great to have such experts with us and people that have made a difference as it relates to public and private sector partnership. We all have a role to play, whether it's before, during, or after a disaster strikes. I also want to recognize Brigadier General Barry Keeling, Colonel Mike Edmondson, and all of the Louisiana National Guard members and state police officers who are with us. Will you please help me welcome them? I appreciate them. Thank you for what you do and for what you stand for. We're here today to support the communities of the Gulf Coast, to discuss lessons learned since Hurricane Katrina, and to support further disaster readiness and resiliency efforts. For many of us here, this is an emotional anniversary. At Walmart, Katrina wasn't something we just watched on TV. We lived it in our stores and clubs. It took a heartbreaking toll on our customers, our associates, and our communities. I'll bet each one of you remembers where you were when the storm hit, when the levees broke. I know that I do. Just a few weeks before that happened, I had assumed responsibility for Sam's Club as its CEO. And at that time, we had 12 clubs and 1,800 associates that were impacted in Louisiana and Mississippi, not to count all the Walmart associates that were in the area. And our first thought was, we got to find everybody. We've got to go find our associates. So we had the rosters from our clubs, and we began a process of trying to locate everyone and make sure that they were okay. So as the hours went by, we had conference calls and meetings, and we would celebrate finding people and making sure that they were okay and that their families were okay. The next step when we found them was to make sure they were getting paid. We made cash available. We made jobs north as people migrated so that they knew they had a place to go to work. We promised all of them that they'd have a job just as soon as we could find the right club for them to work on so that we could keep their families moving forward and make sure that they had some cash flow. And I remember as the tragedy kind of sunk in and we all realized what was happening, on one of our conference calls where people from the company all came together to make sure, Ken, all the things were moving forward that needed to move forward, whether it's the movement of product or other things, first and foremost, finding our people. Lee Scott was our CEO at the time, and as we were talking through those things, Lee, at the end of one of those calls, said, guys, this situation is bad, it's getting worse, and people aren't stepping up and turning the tide. So what if we did something more? What if we stepped up in a bigger way? What if we did something that was unprecedented and didn't even count how many truckloads we were moving and didn't stop to count how many pallets of water and how many other supplies were going that way? We will figure out later how much this costs. Go big. Figure out what you can do that's more than what you're already doing. I like pictures. And this is the picture that emerged from that point that Lee made when we were on that conference call that day. This is a convoy of Walmart trucks waiting for permission to enter New Orleans. And to me, it sums up the very best of Walmart. The other day, there were a group of associates that came into my office. I now sit in Sam Walton's office, our founder, and there were a group of associates that were touring the home office, and one of them was a truck driver, and he walked into my office and he saw that picture behind my desk, a painting of that picture actually, and he said, "I'm the fifth one back," and he pointed at its tractor. I said, "Get out of here, are you serious? I need to have my picture made with you, man, come around here." So we, this truck driver, big truck driver and I are hugging in front of this picture, but he's a hero. And every one of those drivers and all the other Walmart and Sam's Club associates involved were heroes, and we're going to celebrate them as we remember Katrina. As always, our associates make the difference. We've got some photographs here of what they did, and they didn't have to do a study or convene a committee. They knew what their families needed. They knew what the people of New Orleans and in Mississippi, what people needed, and they just got about doing that. And they just did what was right. I want to tell you one quick story about Jessica Lewis. Jessica was our co-manager in Waveland, Mississippi, and the flooding from the storm wreaked havoc on her store. That night, she used a bulldozer. Where she got a bulldozer, I don't know, and I haven't checked out, but she took that bulldozer and she cleared the way into her store, through the front of the store, and created a path through the middle of this hurricane-ravaged store to find water and clothing and food and just give them away. And she didn't ask anybody's permission. She didn't stop to try and count it. She just did what needed to be done. I'm also thinking of the dozens of Sam's Club market managers and club managers who came here from all over the country. They worked hard during the day. They helped everybody they could help. And then at night, they would climb into the steel inside of a Sam's Club and sleep in makeshift beds through the night so they could get up and work the next day. One of our officers, Mike Turner, who's a volunteer firefighter back in Arkansas, was dispatched down here and was helping land helicopters and things in our parking lots to help search and rescue teams, make sure they had food and make sure they had everything that they needed. And hundreds of people, just like Mike, did whatever needed to be done. They tried to reopen the clubs and stores as fast as they could and get back to normalcy, and I think we've got a picture of what one of those lines looked like outside of the Sam's Clubs. The things they did and learned during Katrina changed us as a company, and it changed how we approach emergency management. And I quickly just want to share 3 lessons that the company and I have learned from this experience. First, it changed how Walmart viewed our role in the world. We saw how we could use our strengths to help others in a different way. And Lee, a few weeks after that, challenged us as a company by asking us, what would it take for Walmart to be that company, our best, all the time? What if we used our size and resources to make this country and this earth an even better place for all of us, customers, associates, our children, and generations unborn? This feeling led us to start the sustainability efforts that we have at Walmart. It was a spark. Kathleen McLaughlin's here with us, and today she leads our sustainability efforts around the world. And I'm really proud to tell you that over the last decade, big and important things have been done in our supply chain with our own assets to try and create a situation where the world is more sustainable using the size and scale of Walmart. And that happened to a large extent because of the spark that happened here in New Orleans and in Mississippi. And we're really proud of that work and proud of how it started. The second lesson that we learned is about how we think about the private sector's role during a disaster. The private sector used to be seen as another victim, with property damaged and employees displaced. But now the public sector sees the private sector as a partner and part of the community. We're proud to be a part of those broader efforts that includes government, the private sector, nonprofit organizations, and academia. This picture is from the response to the flooding in Texas earlier this summer. We partnered with Team Rubicon, an NGO founded by veterans, to use their unique skills to respond to disasters. At Walmart, we want to lead. We have a presence in local communities. We certainly have a well-stocked amount of supplies. We're able to move quickly, and we have a culture of doing the right thing. Today, the public sector regularly reaches out to the private sector to talk about better ways to drive preparedness and to deliver essential services in times of disaster. And we appreciate your partnership because we want to lend a hand. We sincerely want to make a difference. The third lesson and final lesson is that it changed the hearts and minds in this country around the importance of preparedness itself. We've seen increasing numbers of disasters globally, and we know that we've got to be sharper than ever. We need to go from reacting to being proactive in our planning, and from disaster response to resiliency and preparedness. According to FEMA, every dollar investment in preparedness saves $4 on relief expenditures. And we need to keep our focus on making a difference. Today, Walmart, we are committing to $25 million over the next 5 years to support disaster recovery and resiliency efforts worldwide. $25 million. And I'm proud to share that the Walmart Foundation is making an initial investment of $500,000 to local nonprofits in the Gulf Coast. So we all, thank you, Kathleen. We all have a part to play, and that's why we're here together. And we want to thank you for your investment of time. And we've got a great program today. I'm sure we'll learn a lot and we'll enjoy it together. And now it's my honor to turn things over to a proud son of New Orleans, a friend of mine and a friend of our company, Harry Connick Jr. Please welcome Harry.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Mayor Landrieu, and to all the heroes that are here today. It really is an honor for me, just as a son of this incredible city who played a very small part in watching New Orleans come back from a terrible tragedy. This room brings back incredible memories to me. I had my wedding reception in this room. Doug and I were talking before I came up, and he asked me how long I'd been married. I said 21 years, and he very boastfully said, well, I've been married 24 years. So great, you won that battle, great, great. Mitch and I were just talking about being under the stands during the Mardi Gras parades when we were kids, picking up doubloons, looking for doubloons. And I can honestly say that's the only thing we were looking at is doubloons under those stands. There's a lot of rumors about what goes on under those stands. All we were doing was getting doubloons and beads. The picture that Doug showed about all of the trucks coming in, I have to personally attest to that. The difference between my arrival into New Orleans the day after Katrina and the Walmart trucks when they came to New Orleans shortly after Katrina was that they waited for permission because there was such a huge convoy. I think it was 1,500 trucks or something like that. I don't know how many laws I broke finding my way into this. It was just, it looked like the Wild West. I mean, it was terrifying. And I did the only way I got down here was because Bob Wright, the former head of NBC, let me get on his plane. I called him, I said, man, I need to get down there. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know if I've ever said this, but I couldn't find my dad. He wasn't answering the phone, and I needed to check on my dad and my family. So I told Bob Wright, let me borrow your plane to get down to New Orleans. I need to go down there. He said, well, will you do some correspondence work for me for NBC? I said, I'll do whatever I have to do. So we got to Baton Rouge, and we were siphoning gas and all kinds of stuff to get here. And I remember getting to Canal Street. We were right in front of the Ritz Hotel, staying in a Winnebago. And around 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, I guess this was 2 days after the levees broke, this guy recognized me and said, "Hey man, you need to come to the convention center. You need to see this." And he physically grabbed my hand and brought me down there. And the first thing he showed me was this sort of a mound covered by a blanket. He ripped the blanket off, and it was a dead elderly woman in a wheelchair. And then he brought me and showed me another dead body. And then Mayor Landrieu talked about how Katrina didn't know class or color or creed. He brought me into the convention center, and the first people I saw were a group of white women who were just sitting in a circle, elderly women who had been told to go to the convention center so that they could be evacuated out of New Orleans, and they had been there for a couple of days, and nobody was there. Nobody showed up. And they were saying, they were just sitting there calmly like, is anybody going to come for us? You know, I need my heart medication, or I need my whatever they needed. And then you met the, poor African-American mother whose, babies were dehydrated. And so I got a satellite phone and stood on top of a chair. By the way, I'm not saying this for any credit. I was an eyewitness to the most tragic thing I'd ever seen. And I got on top of a chair and I called everybody's attention. I said, look, man, I'm a piano player. I'll do what I can. And I called NBC. I said, are you aware that there are like 30,000 people here? And that's when people like the Walmart crew started showing up with 100,000 meals or helping people get jobs and stuff. Anyway, we all know how bad of a time it was, but I got to tell you, so much greatness came out of that dark, dark time for us. About a week after the storm, my buddy Branford Marsalis and I were going to check on his dad's house on Hickory Street, which was underwater. And we said, man, we need to do something. And Branford said, well, what do you want to do? I said, we need to rebuild the city. And I called my dad and said, Dad, we need to rebuild New Orleans. My dad said, man, you are so stupid. You have no idea what you're talking about. What do you mean rebuild the city? I just felt like I needed to do something. So we kind of calmed down and we drove to the Astrodome in Houston to visit the evacuees and realized, like Mayor Landrieu said, I mean, this whole chunk of our country was about to really disappear for real. So I started thinking, what can we do? So Branford and I came up with this idea, let's build a school that will teach young people the traditions that we learned about music and culture and sit in with all the great musicians. We didn't need that, but we were like, oh my gosh, people have been displaced, what are we gonna do? So we came up with an idea of the Ellis Marsalis Center for Music. I think we have some pictures of it. Musicians Village was, and by the way, none of this stuff could have happened had it not been for the leadership of people like Walmart. I mean, y'all did the heavy lifting, giving people the sustenance that they needed to do this kind of work. But you all recognize these pictures, but the Musicians Village is essentially 80, there's me and Branford. That's on the spot in the Ninth Ward where the village is now. There are 80 homes, and by law, we couldn't invite only musicians to sign up for this thing, although that's what I wanted to do, just have like 100% musicians in this place. But we told them there's a federal mandate that says if you can't exclude non-musicians. So we just told every musician we knew, please sign up for this. So 80% of these 80 homes are now occupied by musicians and their families. It's a real thriving community. I'm sure most of y'all know where it is. And now we have the center, which is this multi-million-dollar facility right in the middle that's got the best recording studio in New Orleans. There's me and Ellis. For those of y'all who don't know, that's Ellis Marsalis on the right, and Branford. And it's the most exciting thing in the world. And for the record, it's a lifelong project for me, just like Walmart is committed for life. And by the way, this guy here, Doug McMillon, is the real deal. I have seen him make ballsy decisions since he's been president of this company, and I have nothing but incredible admiration for you. I think they're so lucky to have you and all the people that work with you. There's our Center for Music. We have kids showing up, hundreds and hundreds of kids getting music lessons, and it's just an amazing thing. So, I'm not going to waste y'all's time and go on and on, but I'm so proud of this city. I'm so proud that Walmart asked me to be a part of this. I feel humbled to be in y'all's presence because y'all are the real heroes here. But, oh, that's our concert hall. It's like being in Venice or something. It's just amazing. And look at all these kids. They need about that much opportunity, just a little teeny bit, to become the next Louis Armstrong or Wynton Marsalis or whatever. Anyway, I'm very proud. Doug, thank you. Thanks to Walmart. It's a great honor for me to be here today, and I hope you all have a good time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks a lot, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, bud. See you.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Manson, and I'm currently a Walmart associate for more than 20 years. I'm also an office associate at Store 912. And when I remember Katrina, I choose to focus on the good things. And more than anything, it was the people that was there like we are here today. I'm happy to be here with all of y'all today. I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Ken Sensor. Ken Sensor is managing global strategy to protect Walmart associates, the facilities, equipment, etc. You name it, he protects it. Prior to joining Walmart, Ken was the assistant director of security for the CIA. How cool is that? It's a Central Intelligence Agency. Please join me in welcome Mr. Ken Sensor.
Jackie, thanks for the great introduction, and more importantly, thanks for what you do to serve our customers and our community every day. It really does make a difference. Thanks everyone here for coming and spending time with us. It's truly an honor to be able to spend the time both remembering Hurricane Katrina and recognizing all of the work that is life-saving that came as a result of it. A lot has changed in a decade. If you think back 10 years ago, some of us had things we called flip phones or BlackBerry devices. Today, just about everybody has a smartphone, and that has really changed the landscape as it relates to emergency response. When you think of technology, it really brings power and insight to disaster response, but you can't rely on technology alone. The fact is, an effective approach requires both technology and a rapid and strong response. The theme of the first panel for this afternoon is going to be looking at technology and the advancements post-Katrina as it relates to disaster risk management. Our panelists will walk you through some of their ideas and accomplishments and use their expert lens to provide insight into this topic. So with that, I'd invite our panelists up to the stage, and I'll go through a brief introduction. Yeah, you first. There you go. Thank you, Richard. So in the chair closest to me, we have Richard Reed. And Richard is currently the Senior Vice President of Disaster Cycle Services for the American Red Cross. Listening to Richard this morning in one of the panels, he described his job as being the leader of an organization that responds to a disaster somewhere in the US every 8 minutes. It's hard to believe that there are that many disasters that require assistance. In addition to his role at the Red Cross, Richard also gets other assignments at times. Most recently, he was asked by the White House to help lead the US response to the Ebola epidemic. So Richard, thanks for being here. Next to Richard, we have Nicole Green. And Nicole is the division administrator for Team Rubicon. And Doug mentioned Team Rubicon earlier in his remarks. It's a nonprofit organization that unites the skills and experiences of military veterans and first responders to rapidly field emergency response teams. She's responsible for the organization's growth and operations west of the Mississippi, and is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. Thank you, Nicole. Sitting next to Nicole is Neil Ash, and Neil is the president and CEO of Walmart's global e-commerce. He started with Walmart in January 2012, and he's responsible for the development of strategy and platform to allow us to integrate our physical and retail space so that we can adequately serve our customers. Prior to Walmart, Neil ran CBS Interactive and was responsible for many of their properties. Thanks, Neil. And last but not least is Shabab Gruberg, and Shabab is the CEO, CIO, CMO of Good 360. So he's doing a lot of jobs there. And he has developed the largest online product philanthropy platform called Giving Place, which connects the charities, companies, and the people who need response. He's a problem solver. He's consulted to more than 150 nonprofits. Let's welcome Shabab. So our first question for the panel is going to go to Richard. And Richard, as the American Red Cross, you're really the most tenured organization on the stage today. Talk to us about how technology has changed the preparedness and resiliency of the American Red Cross since Katrina.
Great, thank you, Ken. So what I would tell you is, like I think everybody else, there's a lot of data out there. There's data about all kinds of things. In the world in which I work and the communities in which we live, the challenge is to turn data into information. And it sounds easy, it's not always the case. I think the evolution of the technology has outpaced sort of the thinking on how do you integrate it at a systems level, or even at a systems of systems level. When you think about preparing, responding, recovering, in the way we do it here in America, which is different than the way others do it, there are multiple players. Some have legislative roles, some have law enforcement roles, some have philanthropic roles, some have faith-based roles, some have city, county, parish roles. And the challenge is how do you integrate those roles, coordinate those roles in a way that delivers an outcome that is meaningful for somebody other than themselves, which is to say, how do you do service delivery, or whatever service it is, and do it in a coordinated way. We are, in some ways, in the American Red Cross, and I would say this with a straight face, it's sort of like the New York City Fire Department, 150 years of experience unimpeded by progress, where you spend a lot of time trying to evolve to the next step, leveraging the technology in a way, in a workforce that doesn't always understand it and therefore sometimes resists it. I think for us, we have found a way to partner with everyone from Google to Microsoft, certainly with our partners at UPS and at Walmart and others, to pick the best practices around everything from supply chain to how do you array your resources in a way that you can get to them quickly. How do you leverage the technology so you can talk up, down, and across the verticals and horizontals of government and other nonprofits, and then with the everyday people, citizens. How do you alert, notify? How do you provide situation awareness? How do you use data, turn it into information to help make decisions that are timely and effective? And then how do you adjust and change those decisions as the environment continues to change? So for us, it's about trying to stay on top of, and this is different than chasing the newest shiny object, by the way. It's trying to figure out within the business processes that you have, that you've established, that function under some fundamental purpose. And I loved what you said about our work fits the principles and the fundamental principles of our organization. As long as you follow those during an emergency, you're probably going to be okay. So taking technology as an enabler for service delivery is where we're at in the American Red Cross, and stitching that across the domains of activity. So preparedness as a function, response as a function, and recovery as a function, unifying those functions with a common platform is what we're after.
Thanks, Richard. The next question is for Nicole, and Team Rubicon is really the point of the spear. The purpose is to go in immediately after a disaster before there's time for more organized first responders to get there. How are you using technology to prepare your organization and its members before the disaster arises and during the response?
That's a great question. As a young organization, we're growing rapidly. We currently have 30,000 team members all across America. And the demand is moving faster than the supply, which is a good problem to have. So how have we adapted to that? In a couple of ways. Before a disaster, one system that we rely on, it's a learning management system. And so we're able to use it to offer online training as well as track the skill sets of our team members. And so what that means is when a disaster happens, whether it's in the United States or, for example, Nepal, through that system, we're able to quickly and easily put a team together. So we can tag and sort people and figure out how many people do we have available that have chainsaw training, who's passed their background check, who's completed pre-deployment basic training, how many Nepalese native speakers do we have available who could be on a plane out of Los Angeles within the next 24 hours. When we're actually responding, we rely heavily on a system called Palantir for damage assessments. Those of you with military or security experience may be more familiar with Palantir as an analytical tool that can be useful for things such as mapping relationships among terrorist networks. We used it for a lot of counterinsurgency work in Iraq, but at Team Rubicon, we use it for damage assessments. And you can put different layers of data into Palantir. So for example, when we were working in the Northeast in 2012 after Hurricane Sandy, we were able to overlay data sets about damage assessments with population density, with income, with age, to help identify where were the populations that were at the greatest risk, so we could prioritize our focus and our resources. A few other tools that we use, one is Everbridge. It's a mass notification system, and it lets us, for example, we could send a text message out to everyone in this room in 30 seconds and say, there's a storm outside, we're planning to respond within the next 24 hours. Please go register your availability if you can come out and work with us for a few days. We also work with a company called Salamander to provide ID badges so you can swipe in and out of, like if you're traveling, you're on scene, how are we keeping up with personnel accountability? How do we know when everyone's arrived? Are they here safely? Did they leave? We're able to keep up with that through Salamander and through these ID badges. And last but not least, we've been doing some work with drones. We're doing some testing with a couple of different drone companies, and we were actually able to pilot the use of drones in Nepal earlier this year. So the weather had been very bad, there wasn't great visibility, and by sending the drones out, we were able to help collect some imagery to get a better sense of what was the path of the storm's destruction.
Thanks, Nicole. Neil, you've done a great job at Walmart of raising the technology platform that we use. What are the trends that you see in Silicon Valley, and what role is Walmart.com and Walmart stores playing in disaster resilience?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I think often gets overlooked about technology is how human technology is. And so, you know, I'd take you back to what Harry was saying. As somebody who's been, I've been to New Orleans many times, and before the hurricane, and it's a great city comprised of wonderful people. And so we all paid close attention when the hurricane was approaching, but then we didn't know. You know, and as Harry said, he stood up with his satellite phone and called NBC News and called Bob Wright and said, hey, do you realize there's 30,000 people here? And what's fundamentally different is that will never happen again. So the Apple iPhone was introduced in 2006. It's hard to contemplate, except for when you looked at some of the pictures that Doug showed of the cars that were in those pictures, how different a time that was. But there was no cell phone. There was no iPhone, really. And as a result, there was no Twitter, there was no Snapchat, there was no Periscope, there was no, none of the communication that we take for granted today. So going forward, the next time this unfortunately happens somewhere, every citizen will be a journalist. Every citizen will be a first responder. And the tools that all of us are building take for granted that they have that supercomputer in their pocket, which allows us to communicate with them and allows them to communicate with us. So those images will get to us days earlier than they did in this case. And so that's very much how we think about technology, which is how can we tie that together to the person at the other end of the line, and then how do we marshal those resources to power those forward. So as you think about our involvement from a technology platform connected to a physical distribution network, we have the ability to now project communication first and foremost. So whether that's to your phone or to the smart televisions in our stores where we can give weather reports or give information about things that people need to do, or we can marshal resources. So obviously all of the technology that they're describing also underpins our supply chain network. So we can make that connection from the person who's got that supercomputer in their pocket and is both a victim and a journalist and a first responder, and we can help to get them what they need as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Neil. Our final question goes to Shabab, and as I mentioned, Good 360 ties those in need with those that have goods to provide. Explain how your technology is being utilized by the organization to help facilitate disaster support.
Sure. And first thing is, Good 360 has distributed over 350 million products online through charities who need them. And what really allows us to do that is our mission is all of your mission. Is every charity who needs something, they can use our platform to get what they need. And the big question here is, from independent research, 60%, 60, of all in-kind donated goods that are distributed during a disaster relief end up in the landfill, end up in the trash. Big, big problems. And what we're saying is, how do we get the right products to the right people at the right time? As Neil just said, mobile technology. We have a phone in our pockets. We want to give that platform, our tool called Disaster Recovery 360, DR 360, the ability for every first responder, recovery agent, and charity to say, what do I need? What do I need during the relief stage, the response stage, the rebuilding stage? And through our corporate partners, telling them, here are the things we need, and using our crowdfunding tool, engaging the public, the consumer, to say, here's how you can ship those products, here's how much we need to ship it to where it needs to go. Now the other part is alleviating some of the congestion. So the last part is, large corporations may want to give concrete, lumber, but that's not needed on day one. What's needed is water, supplies, generators. We can take the concrete into our 3PL and other warehouses and our partners until the charities say, okay, no more water, I need concrete. And as they tell us, we can deliver the good to them.
Thank you, Shabab. As you can see from listening to our experts, technology is going to have a major role in addressing disaster management going forward. Please help me appreciate our panel for their insights.
Hello, I'm Art Moderer, the Sam's Club manager and associate for the past 29 years. I had the opportunity 10 years ago to go back and reopen the Kenner Sam's Club, and was one of the first retailers open in the New Orleans area. It was a very challenging, and it was very rewarding at the same time. But there's also a lot of caring and concern that I felt when I was there in trying to get the club back open, because I knew I had my family back home. That's my family at Walmart and Sam's Club. They took care of us. They took care of our associates, and they took care of the community. During that time, I called on colleagues and asked for their help, and they were there instantly, without question, offering help, as you saw in the video. That's why I'm honored here today to introduce our next guest, Miss or Mrs., I should say, Kathleen McMillon. I had to get that right, sorry. President of Walmart Foundation, where she leads the company's charitable gift giving and it oversees company's disaster portfolio. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Kathleen McMillon.
Thanks very much, Art. You know, we're just so thankful to be here 10 years after Katrina in this community where we live and work. We're very grateful to be here and also very proud to be a growing part of this community. Thank you all for coming here, being with us here today. You know, we talked about the $25 million announcement today. Thanks, Doug, for making that. We're very excited. And over the years, our role in disaster has shifted a bit from what began as almost an accidental part in a response in Katrina to something that became more intentional, and then more recently, we've been focused on resilience as well. And our focus in resilience is really about strengthening the capacity of people to respond in the moment. And so the $500,000 that you mentioned that we'll be investing in the next little while in the Gulf Coast, many of those grants are about that. How can we help people be more equipped to respond? And so we'll be investing in folks like the St. Bernard Project, Evacueteer, and so on, and that's really our focus. We're also, given that, quite happy to be sponsoring the Citywide Day of Service on August 29th. Very excited about that. And so, you know, we just invite folks, if you haven't signed up already, go to katrina10.org. You can sign up there to be part of that day, and many of us will be there with our sleeves rolled up and really happy to provide some support to the city here for that event. The grants that we've been making lately, as I said, are really about how do we help people respond. And just to give you a few examples, you heard from folks up here a minute ago from Good 360 and from Team Rubicon. Those are a couple of examples. We're also investing in an organization called Pixera, which is looking to build a global disaster response corps along the lines of Team Rubicon. And in fact, Team Rubicon is one of the folks that we're collaborating with Pixera. And we have 12 Pixera fellows who are here today, who've come here to get some training over the next few weeks, and we'll be deploying them. Are they here in the room? Can you get to stand up so folks can see who you are? I know we've got a number of them here today. There's folks, thank you. Don't be shy. And also the UN. The UN has been playing a very important role in not only response, but also risk management and risk reduction. So we've made an investment with the UN to focus on the resilience of communities. So we're quite excited about those partnerships. And partnerships is a key theme that we've learned since Katrina is really critical in terms of disaster response. You will have seen when you came in on your chairs this report from LSU that we commissioned to help frame the conversations in this session today and some other sessions we had this morning. And there's some good insights here about what we've learned as a response community in the last 10 years. Partnerships is a very important element. So we're going to watch a video about Team Rubicon, one of our partners, and then it'll be my pleasure to host a panel discussion around the role of public-private partnerships in disaster.
Team Rubicon was an opportunity to go out and do hands-on work in communities affected by a disaster.
Wimberley, Texas had historic flooding. This is what they called a 1,000-year flood, something that had never been seen. When I got to Wimberley, I was surrounded by devastation everywhere. Trees down, homes moved off their foundations, everything just down to piles of rubble. There wasn't a whole lot left.
It's crazy just to see the devastation that water can do. You don't think much about water, you think about playing in water, and then you look down at this little river that's next to everything and you're like, how did it get 50 feet up in the air? And you can look up on the hill and see the houses ripped up on the side and you're like, what happened here?
It really hits me when I see people walking around their houses trying to understand what's happened.
There was one house, we walk up and she's sitting on the ground digging through the dirt. It was crazy just to know that she was so lost at that point, just trying to find her items.
And when I'm able to pull something out of the mud and hand her her long-lost brother's Vietnam dog tags or her husband's military blanket and see the expression of gratitude, that's more than enough payment for me.
Just watching things like this, and you're like, you know what? I can make a difference. I can help. I may not be able to fix everything that was torn up, but I can help. I can get you back to a point where you can start again.
Organizations like ours are out there to help these people rebuild. You need someone to help you bridge that gap between having nothing and being able to have something.
Well, it's wonderful grantees and partners like Team Rubicon that certainly allow us at Walmart to extend the impact of what we do. So a few minutes ago, we got to hear about technology and how important technology is in response. In this conversation, we're going to be focusing on partnerships, and in particular, the importance of public-private partnerships in mounting effective responses to disaster. And Katrina certainly shaped our collective understanding of just how important those kinds of partnerships are. I'd like to introduce the panel. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jose Juan Batista. He's a J.P. Morgan Chase Endowed Professor of Business Solutions to Urban Economic Problems right here at Xavier University. So welcome, Dr. Batista. Brian Lipper serves as the Vice President for City Relationships at the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities Initiative. So welcome, Brian. Thank you for being here. Ricardo Mena is a director at the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Office, and he's been with the UN since 1993. So welcome, Ricardo. And finally, Joe Ruiz directs UPS's Humanitarian Relief and Resilience Program. So thanks for being with us today, Joe. So let me start with you, Joe. After Katrina, you launched the Humanitarian Relief and Resilience Program at the company. And it'd be great for folks to hear about some of the PPPs that you've been part of since then and what you've learned about the assets that the private sector can bring to bear in disaster situations and some of the success factors, some of the challenges.
Kathleen, thank you for having me on the panel today, and it's been a great day. I want to recognize all the first responders who are here, all the agencies that have been so key to the response to Katrina, but also to communities around the world. Because UPS is 400,000 employees in 200 countries, every disaster is personal for us, and that's why we've realized from Katrina really that you can't do this alone, and that was really a tipping point for us. When you think about being a global company with thousands of customers and thousands of employees, that we realized from Katrina that we needed to really look at our structure and make partnerships. We've built strategic partnerships with all of the preeminent relief organizations around the world, the Red Cross in the United States, Salvation Army, the UN agencies we have relationships with, but also the grassroots organizations that support preparedness and the recovery aspects. Some great organizations here in New Orleans, like St. Bernard Project. I saw the Tool Bank disaster trailer, which is something that again, our goal is to try to connect people to what the needs are. And so, Tool Bank's a perfect example of volunteers who want to help but don't have the tools necessary. One of the first partnerships we created was with the Global Logistics Cluster because has been spoken here so many times, logistics is such a key part of building a supply chain to be able to be resilient, prepared, and get things to where they need to be. We actually built a partnership with our competitors in the logistics industry. Strange bedfellows, yes, but we now have a core of 70 individuals around the world who've deployed to more than a dozen disasters. We actually train together 3 corporate competitors that work together, UPS, Agility Logistics, and Maersk. And we bring our key assets of transportation, warehousing, customs brokerage, as those are the key issues that often impede the ability to get supplies to where they need to be. We also have developed an international program that supports preparedness for small businesses. We work with the UN, we work with our country operations around the world to try to build better preparedness techniques in small businesses. As was spoken here today, small businesses make up the majority of businesses around the world, and they're often not at the table. A lot of big companies tend to, like UPS and Walmart, so we're often speaking to the choir. It's important to bring small businesses in. And finally, I would say the one thing that we have learned is that big corporations like Walmart, UPS, have a great obligation to prepare our own employees, because we know that only when our employees feel like their families are safe and they're secure, then can we get people back to work and start helping the process of rebuilding the community. And that's so important. We were very proud to be back up and running here in New Orleans 18 days after the disaster. We made sure that our employees had employment. We moved them to other locations in the interim. We put them to work as responders. We worked with Governor Barber and had someone running the logistics warehouse in Mississippi. So we're very proud to be a part of this community, and we're very committed to helping this community as well as all communities be safe.
Thank you, Joe. You know, it's interesting, and certainly in Katrina and in other disasters, it's often the employees of companies like UPS, because they're supported by the company, are often ones who rise to the occasion as local heroes, and we'll hear about some of those stories a bit later. Bryna, your focus at the Rockefeller Foundation is on strengthening the resilience of cities. Can you tell us about the 100 Resilient Cities Initiative and some of the things you're doing to do that?
Certainly. We, unlike many of you here in this room, are often looking at disaster response or disaster recovery and disaster management. We're looking almost always at the other side of the coin. How do we strengthen cities and communities, recognizing that disasters are going to happen and that in fact we're going to have to help prepare cities become more adaptive, more flexible, build their local capacity in all of those events. We're also looking not only at disasters, either man-made or natural, but we're looking at the stresses, the chronic stresses that erode the fabric of cities over a period of time. The disasters like air pollution and what that causes in chronic health issues. The disasters such as violence endemics in cities. So those chronic stresses that in times of a natural disaster like a hurricane or a major catastrophe almost impact the city even worse in their ability to recover. And so 100 Resilient Cities was born out of a recognition of most of these instances would be consolidated or clustered in cities globally in the future. We all know here in this room the statistics of urban growth and urban development on the rise from about 50% of global population in cities near term right now to what will increase to certain parts of the population, particularly the developing world, 75 and 80% in the future. So we're looking at these very concentrated pockets within cities and in the urban context, and the need to protect, buttress, and strengthen those communities. And so we recognize the importance of how we help cities organize around resilience and how we can build their capacity and strength within the public sector. And while we're helping cities organize around resilience, we're also trying to help organize the market to respond to that demand within cities. So how do we build a collection of partners from around the world that can respond to the resilience demand that's coming out of cities and emerging out of cities? And New Orleans, of course, is one of the cities that was almost automatically selected for the 100 Resilient Cities program initially. Not only for the need that they had, of course, but because of the decade of innovation and lessons learned in response of not only Hurricane Katrina, of course, but the violence endemic here that we talk about often as a part of their chronic resilience struggles, inequality that the city is trying to face and wrestle with courageously, and climate change issues that are going to become incredibly consequent to the city in the future. So how do we help cities like New Orleans organize around that agenda and state what their public policy priorities are? And then how do we help the market respond to what those public priorities are? And so a great example of that is just here in New Orleans in particular. One of our platform partners is the large reinsurance company Swiss Re. Of course, reinsurance is a key component in a disaster recovery context, but what about in a creative and innovation space of thinking about how do we actually repair continuity of services or set up structures in advance so when something does occur or when a disaster does strike, that reinsurance could actually pick up in a place of business continuity and pick up in times of services being down, emergency services such as your water supply systems or your energy systems. So we're working with a company like Swiss Re and Veolia, who manages business continuity systems and services systems, to partner and innovate on creating those kinds of innovative structures on behalf of the city of New Orleans, who has identified that need. As you can imagine, my final point is orchestrating those kinds of partnerships across 100 cities around the world and some of our largest cities. We can catalyze some real change around resilience. So developing these tool sets for cities to organize around, but also catalyzing the market to respond to that need, we believe that we're going to trigger some incredible demand and some new solutions from the public sector for resilience.
That's great. One of the things I think is interesting about your initiative is it's very practical, right? So one of the things the foundation is doing is helping to fund resilience officers in these cities and to fund the creation of resilience strategies that do what you just talked about. Yeah. And that ability to connect across cities on things that are in common across cities in totally different parts of the world. I think that's exciting. Dr. Batista, I would love for you to talk a bit about your research and your experiences, particularly with respect to Haiyan and what's happened there and what we can learn about public-private partnerships from that experience.
Yes, it's hard to believe that as we're sitting here commemorating the Hurricane Katrina, it's hard for me to realize that we're coming up on 2 years when the country of my birth, the Philippines, was devastated by a natural disaster called Typhoon Haiyan. In the Philippines, we called it Typhoon Yolanda. And the result of that catastrophe was upwards of 9,000 deaths in the affected areas, and a whole slew of recovery had to be put on the burden of the government, both public and private sector. Now, the difficulty in that is that the uniqueness of this has a lot to do with many factors. Number one, geography. The Philippines consists of 7,000 islands, and so therefore you have a calamity, a typhoon headed towards the islands, organizing and issuing, for example, a mandatory evacuation is impractical, if not impossible. What do? Do you have them evacuate to another island where, again, the scope of the cone of impact cannot be pinpointed on any one particular island? And so therefore that's a major problem which cannot be mitigated. It just has to be confronted. Number two issue is that in terms of mitigating or recovery, it's nice to say that, okay, partnerships have to be formed. Yes, all partnerships have to be formed, but they must be formed with an understanding of the culture of the people that have been affected. To say, as much as it would be nice, for example, for Walmart, to come in and say, okay, we'll build a store in that affected area, therefore to provide employment, et cetera, economic development. Well, what if that was not the original culture of the area? What if the area was mostly an agricultural area? mainly based on fishing and planting of, again, tropical fruits. Therefore, just saying you're going to have a partnership without the understanding of what the culture is in the area becomes problematic. Number 3, and I don't know if the mayor is still here, but I see the governor's here. It's always going to be problematic where you have competing political factions. And so therefore, within the public sector itself, there's going to be a breakdown in terms of transferring aid from what's been appropriated through the government channels to the affected areas. Because on one hand, you have the government that does have the resources to aid, but you have the bureaucracy impeding it. On the other hand, you have the private sector that has the manpower, doesn't have to go through the bureaucratic channels, but doesn't have the resources. So again, there's that trade-off there, which becomes a formidable challenge.
Lots of challenges, and Ricardo, I think you, just given your work at the UN for many, many years, you sort of sit at an interesting nexus between governments and private sector. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you've seen evolve over the last 10 years and where you think we need to go.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all, and thank you very much for inviting us to be part of the panel. Well, I'm going to make 3 points. My first point refers to the need to change things, because if we continue with business as usual, disaster losses are going to continue increasing. So we need a paradigmatic change. And it was already referred earlier on, this change on not being reactive, but being proactive. So what we are trying to promote is for governments, businesses, academic sector, all the stakeholders, to emphasize on, first, avoiding to generate new risks. So when we are doing investments and when we are doing developments and building, we have to make sure that risk-sensitive standards, codes, and thinking are put into those new investments to avoid generating new risk. Number 2, we have to make sure that we decrease existing risk. And throughout these years, and particularly in the developing world, there have been lots of economic development. We have had many years of good economic growth. Unfortunately, that growth and investments have not been disaster sensitive or risk sensitive. So we have built a tremendous amount of risk stock, which is sitting there, and it's just waiting for the new hazard to trigger a new disaster. So we need to also do some corrective risk. And then finally, third aspect on this first point, we need to invest more on resilience. Disasters affect more the poorest, the most marginalized. Hence, there is a key importance on investing more on poverty reduction issues and on trying to bridge the gaps between the rich and poor to avoid poor people to being affected more as they are now. My second point relates to the fact that governments alone cannot solve the issue. It's getting completely out of control. Losses are increasing, as I said, and if the private sector does not participate, just resilience is a dream that will never be achieved. So we need these private-public partnerships to grow, to increase, to strengthen. One aspect that should be taken into consideration is the fact that actually 80% of investments in general are made by private sector. Just 20%, 25%, depends on the country, is made by the government. So it's key for private sector to take on risk-sensitive investment policies as well. There is an estimation that $6 trillion a year of investments in infrastructure are going to occur in the next 15 years because of economic growth, because of population growth. If that investment continues to be risk-blind, well, you just imagine what type of disasters we are going to have to face in the future. So we have to make an effort to ensure that those investments are risk sensitive. Finally, my third point relates to exactly private-public partnerships. As I said, governments cannot do it alone, and there is a need to strengthen this capacity of private sector to support governments and vice versa, governments to support private sector so that they can do their business without having to face enormous losses. And there are a couple of good examples that we are promoting and following. For example, I have been invited to Colombia in 2 weeks from now to be, if you want, a co-signator of an agreement between the government of Colombia under the Unit for Disaster Risk Management that sits under the presidency of the Republic of Colombia and the National Association of Industrial Enterprises of Colombia, ANDI. And they are now actually renovating a memorandum of understanding to make sure that this new paradigm of being more proactive and doing prospective and corrective risk is filtered down to all enterprises in Colombia at all levels. So these are the type of initiatives that we think are going to make the difference, and I insist, without private sector participation, the problem is just not going to be resolved.
Thank you. So it's about bringing more of a risk management mindset to this topic, not just recovery, and that's true for all sectors. One last question, and this can be for anyone to answer. What advice would you give to the people in this room? We've got folks here representing government, private sector, civil society. What's one practical thing that we could do to strengthen the ties across the sector, across the sectors?
Well, we are proponents of more opportunities like you're presenting today. The opportunities, there are many convenings, opportunities for the public sector, the private sector to come together. Next year will be the World Humanitarian Summit. As Ricardo mentioned, they just had the big disaster risk reduction conference in Sendai. But we have to get more groups engaged. We need to have inclusion in this discussion about resilience. It can't just be the traditional large private sector company, the large response agency. We need to be inclusive of all groups. We need to be inclusive of all genders, the disabled, people with special needs, to make sure that when we're building resilient communities, that we're taking into account the needs of the entire community. And that's really the only way I see that we can continue to grow the resilience by being more inclusive in these discussions.
Okay. On behalf of Walmart, I want to thank you all for joining us here today. Thank you very much. Let's appreciate the panel. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Claire Bobino-Fontenot. She is Executive Vice President and Treasurer of Walmart Stores. And she is a native Louisianan. Did I say that right, Claire? You did. She actually hails from Opelousas. I had to look at exactly how to say that, Louisiana. She's a graduate of the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and she earned her law degree from the Southern University Law Center at Baton Rouge. So, Claire, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging this location and its importance to me. Some of my favorite activities over Mardi Gras have actually happened here at Gallier Hall. But unlike Mr. Connick, I think it's safe to say it since he's not in the room anymore, all of mine were above the stands. When I think of Katrina, it's very personal for me, as it is for, I'm sure, many of the people who are in the room. I'm sure, like me, it evokes a range of emotions. Emotions like panic, sadness, frustration. But for me, there was an added emotion of guilt. because almost exactly 1 year after I joined Walmart, Katrina hit the Gulf Coast and this state that I love so much. The guilt that it invoked in me was primarily because for several days, there were members of my family that we couldn't find. And in fact, my very best friend, Vicki Charles, is a nurse at the VA hospital that's not very far from here. And I couldn't find her either. So I made a decision that I don't think Doug McMillon knew about before now, which was that after this leadership meeting that we have every Friday at Walmart, in fact, we had one today, that I was going to go into the office of my boss and explain to him that I was leaving. That was a really difficult decision for me to make because I loved working at Walmart and I saw a future for myself there. But I felt that it was selfish of me to stay high and dry in Bentonville, Arkansas, when such tragedies were happening in this region of the world. So I went to what we call the Friday morning meeting. And I sat back and presentation after presentation after presentation was had talking about what Walmart was doing in New Orleans and what Walmart was doing in the Gulf Coast. And the one that stood out so vividly for me was one that Doug actually featured just a few minutes ago. And it was the story of that assistant manager in Waveland, Mississippi, who found a bulldozer and rammed through the front of the store and did what had to be done. So it dawned upon me that although I'm sure optically you can tell I'm a really strong person, yeah, right? That what I could do alone in Louisiana was nowhere near what I could do as a part of the Walmart family. So I'm confident that my decision to stay at Walmart was the right one. And in fact, one of the things that I now have an ongoing challenge for new people that join the company, when they come by to see me, I tell them, I will buy you lunch if, within 18 months of working in this company, Walmart does not do something that really matters in a space that really matters to you. So I wouldn't have said it if you couldn't contemplate the answer to the question I'm about to ask you. So how many lunches do you think I've sponsored? 0. 11 years running. I'm really proud to be a part of this company. But I have pondered the question, what could one person do to make a big difference with Katrina? And I'm so pleased that one of my privileges today is that I get to introduce you to a wonderful example of the answer to that question. That answer is in the form of Medea Gabriel. Would you please run the video?
Before Hurricane Katrina hit, I was working at Memorial Baptist Hospital on Napoleon Avenue in New Orleans, working in the NICU with the premature babies. We had already, the night before the storm, on the 28th, moved infants from one side of the nursery to an inner room, which was a surgery suite to protect them from wind and any window exposure. I have pictures showing me as early as 12 noon that water was already up to the bumpers outside of the hospital. We didn't know if it was going to rise and fall. And we continued that night, Monday night, to care for the babies, and they started planning evacuations on Tuesday. The engineering guys led us through a back hallway through industrial machines. And when we came to a wall, there was a hole in the wall. Bricks had been removed. And on the other side of the hole in the wall was a man waiting, one of the nurse practitioners waiting, and they had a truck. So we began to pass our babies through the hole to the nurse practitioner and the man on the other side. At that point, it was very hard because now these infants that we've cared so long for. You're putting them in the back of a truck bed. But this is the only route to get to the heliport. One mom did contact me on Facebook. She said, no, you just don't know. You do not understand what you did for me. You kept me steadfast in knowing that my baby was going to be all right and he's all right.
If I had been in the situation that our families were in during Hurricane Katrina, either in the newborn nursery or the NICU, I would have screamed from the mountaintops that I needed Nurse Medea to be the person to take care of my child.
My name is Medea Gabriel. I'm a resident of New Orleans and I'm a Hurricane Katrina survivor.
Medea.
Yes.
Whew.
Yes.
So the very first question that comes to mind for me is, what happened to the babies?
Well, all of the babies that we evacuated made it to their destination, which was at Baton Rouge Women's Hospital. All of the infants went home that we heard, except for one. One didn't make it to go home. They died. I don't know much past that because the hospital closed as it was. I was recently contacted about 4 months ago on Facebook by a mother who recognized me and wanted to thank me for everything that I did for her and her baby. It was surreal to know how much I impacted her life, and she remembered me. Her son now 10, and she remembered how much I did for her. I also saw a story of one of the infants who I helped to get to the heliport is also 10 years old and doing well. So just knowing that these kids are now 10 years old, it lets me go on.
One of the things that I find absolutely extraordinary is that the video and what it reveals is enough to help us to know why it is that we would celebrate you today. But it actually doesn't even tell the whole story. And I want to grab a couple of additional facts that I learned about your experience. Apparently, your mother became ill.
Yes.
And was admitted to the hospital.
Yes.
You had to evacuate her.
Yes.
And then your whole family had to be evacuated from the hospital.
Yes.
And then you had to walk through the city in order to navigate your path to recovery. Why don't you give us some additional understanding of what it was like for you during those days after Katrina?
Well, first of all, once my job was done, and because my mother was ill, my heart fell towards her. They had begun evacuating other patients out of the hospital, and I found out that they were taking single nurses to travel because some didn't have family at the hospital. My best friend Monique, who was seen in the pictures, in the video, she was a single nurse and able to travel. I told her, get her things, you're going with my mother. And so got her where she needed to be. And we ended up at my college roommate's home in New Iberia. Her family took us in and her community took us in because they supported us. I had to start a new job in a new city, Dallas, and deal with a difficult marriage that I was in at the time. But now I'm back in New Orleans and working with pediatric HIV-infected infants and parents who I do research with now.
And let's not fail to mention, you have a new hubby back there too, don't you? Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Now, in the background, Medea and I have agreed on most things. There have been a couple of things we've disagreed about. One of them is, what's the best hot sauce to use on charbroiled oysters?
Louisiana.
Tabasco.
Louisiana.
Okay. I'll let you win because of the audience and the whole hero thing.
But Louisiana is the top producer of any hot sauce.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
We can agree on that.
The second thing that I will not let you win on is that you shy away from the title of hero. You absolutely are a hero, and we're the ones who get to decide that. But I do want you to take this opportunity to talk about, you told me that there were some other people who were heroes too, and why don't you talk about them?
Thank you for seeing me as a hero, but I also know that every coworker that I had there in the hospital with me was also a hero. They were separated from their families. My best friend was a great hero to me because I put my mother's life in her hand, and she stood to the task. The people who drove their boats to pick up patients and staff from the hospital, they bought their own private vehicles and navigated us to dry land. Along the way, just Tammy, my college roommate, she was a hero to me because she opened her house to my whole family without hesitation. I also met a host family in Dallas who just walked up to me and like, you're from New Orleans. We used to live there many years ago. How can we help you? So it takes a community. Another thing I realized, the Red Cross, they provided an avenue for people to connect because we had to go online and search for people. There was a database that they provided to us. And the people who are running that database do not know what it meant to be able to see your family's name and know they went somewhere. So that was very important.
Excellent, excellent. So I think I know that you don't ever truly get over an event or a series of events like Katrina.
No.
But as a final question, can you talk to us about the progress you think we've made since Katrina?
Since Katrina, I can tell you that I'm in a totally different place than I was before Katrina. I found peace and joy in this recovery. The city also is better than it used to be. Everything isn't as good as it used to be. Things are better than it used to be. And through the growth that we're experiencing, I think our resilience reigns through.
Excellent, excellent. One last bit of applause for my hero, Medea. Thank you. So I have one final privilege today, and that is to introduce our next hero of Katrina. And that is in the form of the former governor of Mississippi, Mr. Haley Barbour. Governor Barbour distinguished himself in many ways during the crisis. In 2005, he worked around the clock to get the Gulf Coast functioning again. He worked to get food, to get clothes, to get all of the needs of the Gulf Coast region to the people who did, in fact, need them. He's a great leader, and in fact, he's going to give me an opportunity to do something I've never gotten to do before, which is I'm going to get to play Oprah for a second. One of the things that he's done since Katrina is he's actually written a book, and it's called America's Great Storm, and I strongly encourage that you read it, and you have no excuse because Walmart is going to give everybody in the room a copy today. Please help me in welcoming Governor Barbour.
I'm gonna hold on to my book for a second.
I thought that was mine.
I'll give it
No,
back.
just kidding with you.
Thank you. Thank you to Walmart. Thank you to everybody. The people from Mississippi are surprised to see me come up here with notes, because usually I don't have notes, but when Dan told me I had 8 minutes, with my accent, I can't say good evening in 8 minutes. So I had to go to text to try to stay close. And our next Saturday, the 29th of August, is the 10th anniversary of Katrina. And thank you, I did last week publish this book about Katrina, and I'm very grateful to Walmart for giving everybody one. If the book does the story justice, then this is going to be a great book, because Mississippians' response to Katrina was and is a great story. It's a story of a strong, resilient, self-reliant people who bore the brunt of the worst natural disaster in American history, got knocked down flat. They got right back up and hitched up their britches and went to work to help themselves and to help their neighbors. My mama taught my two older brothers and me when we were growing up that crisis and catastrophe brings out the best in most people. Well, I saw that time and time and time again in Mississippi after Katrina. This 10th anniversary is a commemoration, as Mayor Landrieu mentioned. It's a remembrance. It's not a celebration. We don't celebrate the mega disaster. We'll remember the 238 people killed in Mississippi and the many more who died in Louisiana and other states on the Gulf Coast. But we will also gather, just as we did a minute ago, we will gather to show our gratitude to a lot of people. And that's really why I wrote this book. There's so many people to recognize and thank. Peoples and groups of people the news media ignored throughout. Dan always used to say that the news media doesn't like to cover airplanes that land safely. And that's why we never saw much over Mississippi. There are also many lessons to be learned that I hope you will get from this book. For us, our first responders were magnificent. Local, state, those from other states, those from the federal government, the Coast Guard, the National Guard. Louisiana, like Mississippi, we had young Coast Guardsmen in the dark of night hanging off helicopters on lines, rescuing people out of trees and off the roofs of houses. Kids that were younger than my children. And this gives us a chance to say thanks to them for all the lives they saved. Our local officials, you heard it mentioned in the last presentation. It is normal for political officials to compete for authority. Our local officials could have fought for political control after Katrina. They didn't work for me, but they realized somebody had to be in charge. About half of these local officials were Democrats, and I'm a Republican, but they all said from the beginning, Governor, the logical person to be in charge is you, and we're going to be part of your team. Likewise, our congressional delegation, led by Senator Thad Cochran, our senior senator, and at that time the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, said publicly, we will look to the governor for direction and for a plan on how we can help rebuild South Mississippi and the Gulf Coast. Because you in the state are closer to the action, understand the problems, and what can be done far better than we in Washington ever can. And the rest of the delegation went along. I can tell you, it is an unnatural act for a politician to give up political power. But we saw it from our local officials and our national officials, regardless of party. Greatly underreported during this storm is the help we received from our sister states. 46 different states sent resources to Mississippi. 46. More than 25,000 employees and contractors from different states actually came to Mississippi to work, including more than 10,000 National Guard. On the night of the storm, Governor Bob Riley of Alabama, where Mobile was still under floodwaters and who was up for re-election the next year, sent 2 companies of Alabama National Guard military police to Mississippi. The most valuable assets you have in your National Guard or military police in a disaster. He sent them to Mississippi. He said, we needed it worse. Florida was phenomenal. Governor Bush had pre-positioned first responders in the Panhandle. And when the storm stayed west and hit us and not Florida, they immediately sent them into Mississippi. Tony Robinson's here from FEMA. Your boss, Craig Fugate, was behind that. And We had over 6,000 state employees from Florida who came to Mississippi in the first 4 months after the storm. You will learn in the mega disaster, a lot of people can help you. Let them. And be thankful for them afterwards, like we're thankful for these people. It's altogether fitting and proper that the worst natural disaster in American history, which Katrina was, would elicit the greatest outpouring of philanthropy and volunteerism in American history. And it did. More than 954,000 volunteers came to Mississippi and registered with either a church or a charity and stayed in our state to work in cleanup or rebuilding. To me, what is perhaps more striking, more than 400,000 of them came, kept coming. In fact, they still come. Marcia and I met my wife Marcia was on the coast 70 of the first 90 days after the storm. And she and I met thousands of these volunteers. And I will tell you the most common thing said to me, and it was said to me hundreds of times by volunteers, almost verbatim. Governor, your people are so nice and they're so grateful, but you know, I feel like I've got more out of this for myself than the good I've done for the people I came here to help. Which is a great, great statement about how wonderful it is to be an American and to be in a country where it is fulfilling to help others, which people certainly did. Corporate America was very generous. We've been talking about Walmart. Walmart was a great corporate citizen for Mississippi. Some of you have heard me talk about the Walmart store in Pass Christian, not far from Waveland. And the Pass Christian store paid 70% of the town of Pass Christian sales tax receipts. And the company was advised they should not build back there. They should get back away from the water and get further north, which would have been outside the city limits, which would have meant that the community would have been broke. And Walmart rebuilt where they were. Not because it was, forgive my saying so, not because it was the best thing for the stockholders, but it was the best thing for the community. And Walmart was part of the community. And that happened over and over and over again. Mississippi Power, the electric utility on the coast, and Entergy, the electric utility for the western half of the state, got the electricity back on in 12 days. Less than 2 weeks. After Camille, a much smaller storm, it took almost 2 months. But they understood the importance of getting the electricity back on. I always use the caveat, though. Mississippi Power said, we got electricity to everybody who could take it by September the 10th. What they didn't mention is a third of their customers couldn't receive electricity because their home had been totally destroyed, was not there to get electricity. Great corporate citizens. Chevron was a model corporate citizen. They gave motor fuel to any first responder, military, local government, whatever. And they did it, frankly, for weeks and weeks. They rebuilt every private preschool on the coast because government funding didn't cover that. Walmart was at the top of the stack, but it was a mighty tall stack. I remember the president of GlaxoSmithKline of the United States called me and said, we know that all these health facilities have been destroyed on the coast. We're willing to give you pharmaceuticals, give you health supplies. We have talked to the other companies, Pfizer, Merck, Eli Lilly. We just have one requirement. You have to give us a warehouse that is secure because a lot of this stuff criminals would love to get their hands on. So we had our Mississippi Highway Patrol, like the Louisiana State Police and the National Guard, guard a facility 80 miles inland, and they sent us about $20 million worth of pharmaceuticals and health care. That was happening over and over and over. Many, many, many more companies, large and small. Finally, I want to say something that may strike some of you surprising. We're very grateful in Mississippi to the federal government. FEMA got blistered early on when this logistical system failed, and rightly so. It did fail, and it almost was a catastrophe in my state. But our guys worked around it, and interestingly, we worked around it with the help of the U.S. military. The federal government sent us 1.7 million meals ready to eat. You've heard somebody talk about those earlier. On C5As, out of the military's own stocks, not out of disaster stocks, out of the military stocks. At the end of the day, the federal government had its failures, but they did a heck of a lot more right than wrong. And at the end of the day, they were a good partner. President Bush leaned forward the whole way. On every chance he had, he gave the Gulf states the maximum the law allowed. Congress then passed an unprecedented special emergency disaster relief bill in December. Through it and follow-on legislation, federal assistance in rebuilding was critical to our recovery, our economic recovery, our community recovery, rebuilding our infrastructure, and so on and so on. Louisiana got about $71 billion out of that package. Mississippi got about $24 billion out of that package. But this was unprecedented money. That the four hurricanes that had hit Florida the year before, where the president's own brother was governor, got none of this. This was because it is fitting when you have the worst natural disaster in American history that unprecedented disaster would bring about an unprecedented response. I'll close by saying what I never can go without saying. A critical group for us was our state employees. They worked incredible hours without complaint, generally without being paid overtime. They stayed away from their family. They did whatever it took to serve the people of Mississippi, and particularly to serve the people that needed it the worst. Special tip of the hat to my staff. You know, when you have the worst natural disaster in American history, you don't get to close down the rest of the state government and just focus on this. So these people had to do their regular job every day, and then Katrina on top of that. They get a lot less credit than they deserve, but I am very proud at the end of the day, the Inspector General at HUD and at FEMA, or at DHS, and the General Accounting Office said the way Mississippi state employees handle the money that they sent us should be a model for the way you run the government. You know, my book was written in large part to thank all these people and to let everybody know what these people have done as volunteers and donors, first responders, and politicians to help us in our darkest hour. I hope you'll come away from the book admiring, as I do, the spirit and character of the people of Mississippi. Without that, all of the help would not have made half as much difference. I was taught, as I said earlier, that crisis and catastrophe brings out the best in most people. But I was also taught in the same sentence, catastrophe does not create character. It reveals character. It reveals the character of the people that was already there. That's the way I will always think about Katrina. The people I saw, not just from my state, but those who came down to help us and did so much. We are so blessed to live in this country where you have people with this kind of character. Thank y'all.
Stay on up here. Governor? Well, you went over 8 minutes, but it was worth every minute of it.
8:06.
I do want you to stay up here on stage. I'm going to ask Mayor Landrieu and Administrator Tony Robinson to come on up. Hey, Tony. How are you? We're going to have a quick panel conversation about basically the government's role in 10 years ago and today. My name is Dan Bartlett. I'm Executive Vice President for Corporate Affairs at Walmart. I'm kind of wearing two hats. Everybody have microphones. Prior to working at Walmart, I actually served in the White House, and I was serving in the White House during Katrina 10 years ago. So I have an interesting perspective from that point of view as well, and long-time relationship with the governor, and Mitch and I go back as well. So lots of memories in that regard, and I know we'll start with you, Mayor. You're going to get this question asked probably, I don't know how many times between now and next week.
Answer's yes.
But I want to put I've heard you talk about this a little bit. I think it's safe to say, and it should be understood, that no city can be 100% hardened. And it is an approach that is multi-layered and requires a lot of different groups of entities, whether it be government or its citizens or the corporate sector. Can you give us your interpretation of where the city of New Orleans sits today when it comes to its safety?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I have to just completely admit, although I'm not supposed to be this way, I get defensive every time I'm asked that question because I watched Miami get beat to death, Pensacola, get smacked with a bunch of storms. My grandpa owned a great piece of property in Pass Christian, so I lived through Camille, right? And I was a little bitty boy when Betsy hit. But nobody ever asks anybody in California when an earthquake hits, are y'all better prepared today? I mean, is there something you can do? Why do y'all live there? You silly people, et cetera, et cetera. So on the Gulf Coast, people ask us things as though somehow we can really protect ourselves from things that we really cannot control. Be that as it may, the city of New Orleans, again, as Governor Barber said, and this couldn't have been done without the largesse of the federal taxpayer, now have a fairly robust $14.5 billion levy system and gates that have put the city in a position of being stronger than it was before. Now, the governor and I may have a difference of opinion about this, and actually the storm was a natural disaster for Mississippi. In many ways, it was a man-made disaster in New Orleans, both at the same time, because as he can tell you, for those of you guys that are not from here, storms come in, storms go out. Things get knocked down, we pick them back up, we rebuild, and some of them are tough. Camille was a lot smaller, but it was a pretty dramatic storm. It wasn't until the levees broke here that the game changed. And so as we thought about protecting ourselves, the Corps of Engineers, one of the government agencies that we have worked with, that, by the way, is functioning far better today than they did 10 years ago, but really beginning to hit their stride, calls this a risk reduction strategy, because you can't ever guarantee to folks that you're not going to get hurt. And so a lot of this is also part of rebuilding our coastline, which is deteriorating, by the way, at 100 yards every 45 minutes. It's the buffer for the city of New Orleans. It also protects the oil and gas pipelines, which, by the way, is now producing about, 30% of the nation's energy security and therefore our national security. We think the investment was worthwhile, and the city is stronger today and safer today than it was before. If you ask the question, look, if they always say if another Katrina hits, well, Katrina, when it hit us, was about a 3 and getting a little bit weaker. It wasn't the 5 that was so ominous that we saw out there. If a Category 5 hits you, and it hits you directly, and it hits you really when it's moving not at 12 miles an hour, but maybe about 7 or 8, and it stays over you, it's going to hurt you. And there's almost nothing you can do other than to be prepared to get out of its way. So as a general rule, we would prefer to have Category 5 protection here. That's the difference between $14.5 billion and about $50 billion. We think that we ought to protect ourselves. Yeah, you remember that. But that's what the number is. If you ask the Corps of Engineers, how much is it going to cost for Category 3 strength, they can give you that answer. If you ask them, yeah, but do you think they ought to have 5 and how much that's going to cost, that's really more of a political question in some instances. So I will say that I think we're much stronger today than we have been. I would have to say that it's a risk reduction strategy. It's not a guarantee. That's why when you're building resilience, you've got to build a bunch of layers of it. So rebuilding the coast, making the levee stronger, making sure that how you build back, now in certain zones, people got to build higher. If you kind of go into the pass in Christiana, Biloxi, and you now see people up, I don't know what the height is, Governor, but even in the lower places in Louisiana, you're building 18 feet up. You got to build stronger, better. And then finally, there's nothing that is ever going to replace the personal responsibility of having a plan and listening to the governors and the mayors and the county executives about whether to move or not to move. All of that's part of making sure that you're safe when a big bad storm comes your way.
Yeah. The point you make about the levees is important. I remember sitting in the White House on the evening of, on that Monday evening, Brian Williams was down in the quarters saying the Big Easy looks like they dodged the big one because the levees didn't break till later that night. Everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief, not knowing what was about to hit. So you're absolutely right. Tony, FEMA, a four-letter word. People used other letters probably a decade ago, but a lot of progress has been made at the federal level, a lot of learning, not only from Katrina, but other storms and other events. Give us a sense of how the government is viewing not only its role in partnering with local states, but even the private sector as well.
Sure. Dan, thanks, and I want to thank Walmart for hosting today's event. I want to thank the survivors and the first responders in the room today. They truly are heroes for their rebuilding efforts and what they do each and every day to serve communities around this country. We're going to check our plans first and foremost to make sure we've got etouffee MREs after hearing the mayor's remarks. I think a couple of things to focus on. First, I think our administrator, who is an emergency manager, set some pretty key strategic priorities for that, and that is when we plan, focus on the impacts of survivors. What are we doing to make that first touch meaningful to them, and not only the survivors, but the communities in which we serve. Secondly is plan for the catastrophic. So that is planning for what taxes us beyond our capabilities. Don't plan for what we can do because that's the easy stuff. And I think in order to do that, we have to involve the whole community. And so that starts with citizens. And what are we doing to help prepare them, making sure that those who can help themselves are helping themselves so that first responders can focus on the most vulnerable. Secondly, I think it's take advantage of the resources of the volunteer and faith-based organizations. They have lots of resources, lots of contacts and relationships that can really help us in our planning efforts as well. And then the critical nature of the private sector. They have a lot of resources. So some things we've done there, we have a private sector liaison office in FEMA now. I think Louisiana really set as a state the model with the business EOC, where they're incorporating that emergency operations center in with their standard operations center, and then the national business EOC that FEMA has established as well. I think shows the commitment and the criticality of that resource. And then obviously dealing with our other federal agencies, state, local, tribal governments, making sure they're part of that planning effort. And an example of that is here, where the city has their city-assisted evacuation that then feeds into the state and their planning efforts and the contraflow, and then the federal resources that will come in and help with medical evacuations and area evacuations. It all has to work together. No one of us has the right resources or the things to be able to do that. We have to depend on all others and the whole community to be able to do those things.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Governor, we've talked about this before. I think one of the hard things to do when you're in the middle of a crisis like that, and traditionally was the case, and as you mentioned, that there had been some hurricanes that hit Florida prior to Katrina, so we had some experience. The hard thing is that you train towards precedent. And so we had a playbook that was increasingly figuring out that it was obsolete. But the hardest thing to do during a crisis is to understand when not to cling to precedent, but to throw out the old playbook and start writing your own playbook as you go. And that's a difficult thing to do from a leadership perspective. You've touched on some of the dynamics politically that can take place, the dynamic of, like I said, past precedent. What are those types of leadership qualities? Because what comes out of that also is the public has to have faith and confidence in its public institutions at a time of crisis that they can rely upon. That's one of our core competencies or expectations of government. What are some of the leadership elements or qualities that you understood or at least learned during that process in the years after?
Just preface this by saying that something Mayor Landrieu said is just totally right. This was one storm, but two different catastrophes. We got clobbered by the hurricane side, and y'all had this terrifically awful flood, and both of them are terrible. There's not that one's less than the other, but they were very different. And for us, we had been training for years and years and years, long before Haley Barbour was governor, for the next big hurricane. Yeah. And we knew it was coming. We just thought it would be Camille again. We thought Camille was the gold standard, hit the Gulf Coast with 200-mile-an-hour winds, one of only 3 Category 5 hurricanes to ever actually make landfall as Category 5. Spawned 200 tornadoes. That's what we trained for and trained often for. I believe I mentioned to you after the 4 hurricanes in Florida in 2004, we sent a bunch of our MEMA people to Florida to learn from Craig Fugate, down your boss, but then running Florida FEMA, because we were getting ready for for Camille. When we got Katrina, it was so different. Only 155 mile an hour winds, but the storm surge was the largest storm surge recorded in the history of meteorology. At Waveland, we were talking about the Walmart in Waveland. What was Waveland like? The police station at Waveland, 26 Waveland police officers. The plan was to ride out the storm in the police station, and after the storm passed over, to go out for search and rescue and security. Nobody ever dreamed that the storm surge would go over the top of the building by 15 feet. And the policemen are all washed out. Some of them hung in trees in the area and held on. Others got pushed all the way outside the city limits. But one of the great stories about Katrina, at 8 o'clock that night, all 26 Waveland police officers were on duty in Waveland. But preparation, the mayor mentioned it, preparation is absolutely essential. And even if you prepare for something and you get something much worse or much different, having prepared makes your people more agile, more flexible, more able to adjust. And everybody needs a plan. Walmart needs a plan. No government is big enough to take care of every problem for every family or business all the time, particularly in the mega disaster. And I don't want us to ever have a government that big. So everybody needs to have a plan, and it will help you adjust. And it also gives people more confidence. And I'll close on what I learned, because you mentioned it. The leader has to be open with the public. The leader has to call it like it is, the bitter with the sweet. And the leader's got to tell the truth. The most damaging thing for a person trying to lead through the mega disaster is to get caught lying or fudging. The public can take it, and they need to hear it like it really is, so they can adjust to whatever they got to do. That's a really hard lesson for some people.
That's an interesting segue in the question I want to ask you, Mayor, and that is, you do have to tell it like it is, but one of the things I think mayors or governors and the media have to struggle with is not being overly alarmist, or how do you strike that right balance pre-storm or pre-event to get people prepared but not be accused of overreacting? How do you try to strike that balance?
The governor and I haven't spent much time together. We can spend about a couple hours talking about a lot of funny stories. And I'll tell you one of them. I was in the boat rescuing folks. If I wasn't the first one back here, I was one close, because we couldn't see and we couldn't hear. And the governor sent me down here to try to find the mayor and the parish presidents. So my night was at about 2 in the morning. I was speaking to Doug Thornton on the phone. He was in the Superdome trying to take care of the people. And he said, Mitch, he said, the roof's peeling off of this building. And then the phone went dead. And then I was talking to, Junior Rodriguez, who at the time was parish of St. Bernard, on the phone. And he said, Lieutenant Governor, the water's coming up to the second floor. We don't know if we're going to make it. The phone went dead. And we didn't have any eyes because we didn't have any interoperability. All y'all remember this. So I got down here as fast as I could, came around, found a way down, got on the St. Clair Bridge, and we were helping people get out while I was trying to find out where they were so I could report back later that night. And the water was so high that it was up to the second story, and I went up to this guy's window who was in his T-shirt and his drawers, and I said, man, you got to get in this boat because nobody else is coming. And he saw that I was a lieutenant governor, and he said, I can't believe you had to come rescue me. And I said, well, I'm mad at you. I said, did you hear the governor tell you to leave? He said, yep. And I said, you saw the mayor on TV, and he told you to leave, and every elected official, they told you to leave. Why didn't you leave? He said, because we don't believe anything you politicians say. I almost left him there. But I say that to point out what Governor Barber says. Credibility here is really, really important. Now, it puts governors and parish presidents and county executives and mayors in a difficult spot because you can't call it too early and you can't call it too late. But he's exactly right. You got to call it as you see it. And you just got to tell folks, this is the thing. Now, everybody knows how much money it costs, how much agony there is in terms of evacuating. People don't have an unlimited amount of change in their pocket. And people are worried that if you're too alarmist, next time they're like, well, I mean, he's crying wolf. It's not going to happen. Mayor de Blasio got in trouble in New York on this when he kind of called it. I thought he made the right call, by the way, and folks got mad because the thing kind of passed by. But then you saw what Sandy did to New York. So this is a very, very, very delicate situation. And I think that we know a lot more now. As Governor Barber said, storm surge wasn't something that we paid a lot of mind to. You know, we were categorizing these storms by 1 through 5. Now we're looking at different models. We have better science. But better science sometimes can make the public go to sleep and them think, oh, they got a handle on it. So again, to reiterate this question, if government on its best day can never do for private citizens what they can do for themselves, if everybody decides not to evacuate and 50% of the folks stand aside, no matter how good we are, how much money we have, you can't evacuate that many people. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we forgot after September 11th, and then New York forgot it after it happened to Katrina, was to put the generators on the roof. The evacuations that took place in New Orleans from our hospitals, and then 3 weeks later that I personally participated in Rita in Lake Charles, where we had to medevac, I don't know, how many we medevac 500 people. It cost the government about $3 million because the hospitals and the nursing homes did not have an evacuation plan, and we didn't want to repeat anything that happened in Katrina. You'll remember that years later, just a couple years ago, when Sandy hit in Bellevue in New York, they had the same exact problem. And so again, one of the things that we keep learning from each other is lessons that we somehow forget, which is the private sector has got to be prepared, because at the end of the day, there's not enough resources, not enough time. And by the way, if the first responders are busy rescuing people they could have rescued themselves, they can't go get the folks that are completely unable to do that. And so I can tell you this, I think FEMA was a mess when we first started. I don't think this was a fundamental fight you're going to remember having, because Thad Cochran, who was the head of the Senate Finance Committee, my sister Mary, who was on this side, were arguing about whether to create a recovery authority like the Tennessee Valley Authority or like we did. And we decided to keep it within FEMA. FEMA was designed to be a rescue agency. And it was designed kind of to be a little bit of a recovery agency. It was never designed to be a rebuilding agency. FEMA has morphed into that, and by the way, has gotten really good at it. But even on their best day, they cannot substitute for people having a plan and getting ready, which makes what the governor said all the more important. Political leaders need to be really, really focused. They need to be very honest. They need to be forthright. And you know what? We need to be willing to take the responsibility of making the call. Somebody's got to make it, and the public really relies on us to do it. And I think my experience is, and I've had a lot of storms since Katrina, if you do it forthrightly, if you do it openly, if you do it with transparency, and you do it based on good information, and by the way, listening to the experts and not the politics and the little bit that goes on between county execs and the governors and mayors and all that stuff, I think at the end of the day, you're gonna be okay, and the public's gonna be safer.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, it's a funny story, that guy, but what you're seeing there is it's information biased, and we were plagued with it in the White House, where we'd see something on CNN and just instantly recoil and think, oh, they're just trying to make us look bad or not. But I think the point that Neil makes is that technology has changed all that everybody now has access to real-time information. I got to think, Tony, that technology has probably made FEMA's job maybe a little more complicated, because you have citizens that are lightened up with information, but at the same time, it probably gives you a lot of ground awareness that maybe you didn't have previously.
Absolutely. So social media, we've added on our portal so that citizens can provide information into us so that we can see what's going on in disasters and make them a force multiplier for us.
Yeah, that's really important. I don't know, Haley, if you have any closing comments to make here, but I think what you're seeing, though, and the fact that communities are learning from each other. If you mentioned Rita, the evacuation that took place in the city of Houston after Katrina for Rita was unbelievable, and it was because of the learning, and I think the public is engaged. But I don't know if you think about it, any closing comments here, Haley, as we look back 10 years?
Taking advantage of the technology and getting the government's head straight about this.
Mitch mentioned.
I didn't mean to serve him up exactly like that.
Mitch mentioned in his remarks, it's not his fault. Mitch mentioned in his remarks interoperability.
Right.
When Katrina hit the Mississippi Gulf Coast, it was utter obliteration. There was no electricity, there was no phone service. It was like a Civil War general for my adjutant general. He had to send somebody to wherever. Now, he could send sometimes in a helicopter if it was far enough, but so when the storm's all over and you get your federal assistance under the existing law, there's something called hazard mitigation grant money. So we were entitled to $250 million of it or something. Plenty for what we want to do. We said we want to use our hazard mitigation grant money to build a survivable, interoperable, wireless cellular system and take it to 4G. We had plenty of money to do it. FEMA says that's not an appropriate use of hazard mitigation. I mean, what in the world can you do to mitigate the hazard, to mitigate the risk to lives and property, than to be able to communicate with the people and communicate with each other? And Senator Cochran, you mentioned, finally had to make FEMA move money out of the hazard mitigation account to another FEMA account. And we were entitled to it already by law. And that's the only way we got it done. And no other state has been allowed to do that yet. There are things that we could do. You know, after the storm, we stiffened the building codes so that everything is tougher, stronger, more resilient. We built $600 million worth of water and sewer on the inland side of these counties. The populations of the three coast counties are about 3.5%, 4% more than they were, but the growth is away from the beach. People are north of the interstate, and the three counties north of the coastal counties have had 10 and 15% growth because people wanted to live close, but they realized that the insurance cost and the risk of being right down on the beach just wasn't worth it anymore. So there are some things that make us more resilient, and I hope other states are learning.
Let me to build off comments from both. I think obviously we still have things to do, and I think in any planning effort, anything we do, we can't just rest on our laurels. We've got to continue to plan, train, and exercise, and that even goes for the private citizen. And I think there's been a great deal of effort, like we've heard today, on providing information for the private citizen. So I think NOLA Ready is a great piece of information for people to get informed, but you have to take action. You have to be armed with information, know what your risks are. There's great alert and warning systems that are out there now, but you have to take action. That means get a plan, know what you're going to do, have good communications plans, look at your insurance. Does it cover your risk? So the financial piece of that is extremely important. And then I think it's important for all of us to continue, once again, to look at those things every year and make sure we're keeping them updated. And we are, once again, prepared to take the action, so as the mayor said, that our first responders can take care of those that are most vulnerable.
That's a great point to close on. Will everybody here appreciate and thank our panelists here today?
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I hope that's okay.
Oh, yeah. I have the pleasure to welcome Doug McMillon back up to the stage.
Thanks very much. Thanks for being here. Thanks, Governor. We're just going to wrap up with a few thank yous. First of all, would you join me in thanking all the people at Walmart that helped create this event today? Can we give them a hand? Secondly, I'd like to thank all the first responders and the heroes that we recognize today. Thank you for everything that you do. I want to thank our Walmart, Sam's, and logistics associates that work in this region of the country. It's great to see you all. Thank you for what you do every day. And then lastly, one last round of applause for all of our participants and presenters today. You all did a great job. Thank you very much for being here. We hope that you can see from our announcements today that we mean it. We want to do our part, and we'll be here and help everyone prepare and then do everything we can to help after events like Katrina happen. Normally, we end this meeting with, or this type of meeting with a Walmart cheer, but some of you don't know how to do it, so we'll skip that today. Have a good evening. Thanks again.
Great to see you.
clothes, and you know